All right, sorry about that. And I hope you have some popcorn because we have a lot of stuff today since we didn't have a briefing yesterday. So. This is the daily UN press briefing. This is not where, if you want to come get good news, find it someplace else. All right. Good afternoon. The Security Council had an open debate today on the theme of investing in people to enhance resilience against complex challenges. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, said that rethinking our efforts towards achieving sustainable peace is an absolute necessity. There's only one route to durable peace. It is the route of sustainable development, she added, is also humanity's ultimate prevention tool that can break through cycles of instability to address the underlying drivers of fragility and humanitarian need. Ms. Mohammed urged Council members to keep in mind that the success of our efforts to advance sustainable peace will depend on adequate investment in peace building. Her full remarks were shared with you. And as you saw, just for the record, yesterday afternoon, the Security Council met on Sudan. They heard from Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, who presented his latest report on the situation in Darfur. Tor Venislan, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, said in a statement earlier today he was deeply alarmed and saddened by the continuing cycle of violence in the occupied West Bank. The deaths of Palestinians during an Israeli arrest operation in Jenin is another stark example, he said. Since the beginning of this year, Mr. Venislan said we are continuing to witness high levels of violence and other negative trends that characterize 2022. It is crucial to reduce tensions immediately and prevent more loss of life. He urged and remains actively engaged with Israelis and Palestinian authorities to try to de-escalate the current tensions, restore calm, and avoid further conflict. Also on the same, also on the Israeli, on the situation, the Israeli, in the, excuse me, on the, I mean, a little too much stuff going on today. Also on the occupied Palestinian territory, we, along with our partners, today launched a $502 million appeal for the occupied Palestinian territory to help 1.6 million of the most vulnerable people who live there. The 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan estimates that 2.1 million Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory need humanitarian assistance. They represent 58% of the population in Gaza and a quarter of the people living in the West Bank. The plan comprises more than 200 projects which will help people access essential services such as food, water, healthcare, and education, as well as ways to learn a living and support to improve their mental and physical well-being. Late yesterday evening, we issued a statement on Peru in which the Secretary General said he is concerned about the number of deaths reported in the context of the protests in Peru and urges the authorities to conduct prompt, effective, and impartial investigation into these deaths. As demonstrations continue, the Secretary General also urged restraint to avoid further escalation of violence and reiterated his call as the authorities to a call on the authorities to comply with international human rights law. He also highlighted it is critical to generate conditions for meaningful and inclusive dialogue across the current crisis. Just staying in the southern hemisphere of the Americas, I want to flag that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, just concluded a visit to Colombia, where he signed a new host country agreement with the government of Colombia, extending the presence of the UN's Human Rights Office in Colombia until 2032. During his visit, Mr. Turk met with government officials, including President Gustavo Petro, as well as civil society representatives and representatives of indigenous and Afro-Colombian peoples. He underscored that we must all support efforts to put an end to the discrimination and levels of violence that many communities experience. Mr. Turk will now go on to Venezuela, where he will be there until Saturday. He will also hold a news conference in Caracas at approximately noon on Saturday. More details can be found from our human rights colleagues. And in Haiti, the Pan American Health Organization has confirmed that almost 800,000 people, mainly in the capital Port-au-Prince, have received one dose of the cholera vaccine. That's about half of the population and that half of the people vaccinated are under 15 years old. Cholera cases have now been confirmed in every province of Haiti. We continue to provide support to the Haitian-led efforts to fight cholera despite the challenging security situation and lack of fuel supplies. UNICEF is providing logistical support to dispatch cholera vaccine doses, including portable temperature control vaccine carriers and fuel to maintain the cold chain. The Organization for Migration, International Organization for Migration, is providing cholera services to people displaced by violence, and the Humanitarian Air Service is providing air service. Turning to Brazil, our team in Brazil has been following closely the situation regarding the Yanomami people in the Amazon rainforest. This week, after a Brazilian authorities visit to the region, the resident coordinator for the UN, Sylvia Rux, met with the Minister of Human Rights to coordinate assistance with the Brazilian government. 12 UN agencies are preparing a proposal for an integrated response to the situation of the Yanomami people, offering immediate life-saving support to meet emergency needs of those communities, including initiatives targeting health and food security needs. As you may have seen in press reports, the situation is rather dire for the Yanomami. One of the priorities is also to tackle environmental threats, including addressing grave concerns of high concentration of mercury contamination in several rivers in the region. Mercury, as you well know, is highly toxic and is used by illegal miners to clean up gold from other sediments. The team also offered international experts to boost support to national and local authorities. Since last year, our colleagues in Brazil have conducted 2 missions to the area to assess the needs of the Yanomami people in coordination with local partners, national partners. Regarding the Amazon region in general, since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the UN on the ground has prioritized the delivery of protective and life-saving support to indigenous peoples, including migrants from neighboring communities, in coordination with local authorities. Turning to Ukraine, on the humanitarian side, our colleagues on the ground tell us that a new wave of airstrikes this morning killed and injured civilians and damaged civilian infrastructure, mainly on energy, in the capital Kyiv and at least 5 other regions of Ukraine. Millions of people are facing additional power outages, mainly in Kyiv, Odessa, and Vinnytsia region. The targeting of energy infrastructure constitutes a serious violation of international humanitarian law. In Odessa, our colleagues on the ground said the entire city of roughly a million was temporarily left without water. As fighting continues, the consequences of the airstrikes for civilians are dire. Across Ukraine, more than 18 million people need humanitarian aid. Our humanitarian coordinator and head of the UN presence in Ukraine, Denise Brown, announced the release of $50 million from the Ukraine Emergency Humanitarian Fund to support critical activities in the eastern and southern part of the country. We want to thank our donors to this fund. In 2022, the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund received more than $327 million, making it the largest country-based pooled fund managed by OCHA. Also on Ukraine, you will see yesterday, the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO decided to inscribe the historic center of Odessa on the World Heritage list. And our friend Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees, is in Ukraine. In a tweet, he said he told President Zelensky that he was shocked by the destruction that he saw, but was deeply impressed by the unbreakable spirit of the people of Ukraine. Moving to the African continent, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, our peacekeeping mission there reports the situation in the country's east remains tense, with reports of clashes between Congolese armed forces and the M23 in south and southeast of Kichanga in North Kivu province. Clashes were also reported in Kishishe, about 25 kilometers north of Rutshuru, including a use of heavy weapons. This follows a series of assaults 2 days ago by the M23 on the positions of the Congolese army west of Rutshuru. This resulted in the displacement of about 4,300 households. About 450 people sought shelter in and around the UN base in Kichinga, where they were provided with tents, food, water, and first aid. The peacekeepers are carrying out regular patrols around the base and neighboring villages to deter armed groups from causing harm to civilians. Yesterday, the mission also reported an explosion on the city of Beni. At least 18 civilians, including 13 women, were wounded, 4 of whom are in critical condition. The UN Mine Action Service sent a specialized team to the scene to investigate. And in Niger, our Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator, Joyce Msuya, visited Walam yesterday, which is in the Tillabéri region on the border with Mali and Burkina Faso. Ms. Msuya said she was moved by the resilience and unity of the people she met, including internally displaced people, refugees, and members of host communities. This year, we are appealing for $584 million to provide humanitarian assistance to people in Niger. The total number of people in need in Niger has more than doubled in the past few years, from 1.9 million in 2017 to 4.3 million in 2023. The needs are driven by displacement due to violence, the climate crisis, high poverty, and low levels of development. As we mentioned earlier, Ms. Msuya participated in the third Lake Chad conference, where more than $500 million was announced by donors to support people facing crisis in that area. She continues to visit Niger today, where she'll be meeting with government officials, partners in civil society. 2 quick notes from Myanmar. The UN Office of Drugs and Crime today released its newest survey on opium cultivation. The agency estimates that poppy cultivation in Myanmar has increased by 33% in the first season since the military took takeover. The survey also points towards a more sophisticated farming practices and concentration of opium poppy cultivation. The UN agency says economic, security, and governance disruptions that followed the military takeover have converged, and farmers in remote, often conflict-prone areas have had little option but to move back into opium cultivation. National yield estimates indicate an average of 19.8 kilograms of opium per hectare of poppy. That's the highest estimates in Myanmar since UNODC started measuring a few years ago. You can see the full report online. Also on Myanmar, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that we and our partners have launched an appeal for $764 million to provide life-saving support to people who need it this year. Acting resident humanitarian coordinator Ramanthan Balakrishnan predicted a challenging year ahead for both crisis-affected people and the response to aid workers. 1/3 of those we are aiming to help are children, 13% live with disabilities, and 1.6 million people are displaced internally. Last year, we assisted 3.9 million out of 6.2 million people targeted, or more than 60% of the people we're trying to reach. I want to give you an update on a story some of you had been asking about regarding the UN Office for Project Services, UNOPS. As you may recall, following allegations of possible misconduct concerning Vitaly Vancelboim, the former Assistant Secretary General and S3I Chief Executive at UNOPS, the Secretary General initiated an internal accountability process last year in accordance with our own internal legal framework. The accountability process has now been concluded. Mr. Vancelboim has been separated from service with the United Nations. A senior personnel appointment of somebody coming in. Today, the Secretary General is appointing Mojan Kunyame Gumbi of South Africa as his special advisor for addressing racism in the workplace. The special advisor will provide strategic advice to the Secretary General on addressing racism and racial discrimination, as well as oversee the implementation of the long-term strategic action plan adopted by the UN in 2022 to address racism in the workplace. Ms. Gumbi has several years of experience, and we have lots more online. Somebody wanted good news. I think Maggie wanted good news. At least it's good news for us. We want to thank our friends in Algiers and Luxembourg for their country's full payment to the regular budget. Their checks have been received and cashed, and they've cleared. We now have 12 member states on the honor roll, and I think they have till about the middle of February Others have about the middle of February. All in mauve today. Please, Edie.
Thank you, Steph. I know that you mentioned Torwenesland at the beginning of the briefing, but my question is, does the Secretary General have any reaction to this Israeli raid that killed at least 9 people in a West Bank refugee camp, and the Palestinian authorities' reaction cutting security cooperation with Israel?
The Secretary General is deeply alarmed by the escalation of the situation in the occupied West Bank, most recently with what's happened in Jenin today. He is very much concerned about the possibility of worsening violence in the West Bank and beyond, in Gaza. I think, as we've said, it's crucial to do whatever is possible to lower tensions, to de-escalate. Mr. Venesland is focusing his work on exactly that.
Follow-up, is he going to raise it at the...
Hold on.
Is he going to raise it
Yeah,
with the Israeli
okay,
ambassador today?
So go ahead and now.
Another follow-up. The United Nations said today that in Afghanistan, malnutrition rates are at a record high. Is Martin Griffiths still there?
No, I was in touch with Martin a bit earlier today. He's in Doha. He left Afghanistan. But we do have a briefing scheduled with him, hopefully Monday at 11 a.m. When he's back here.
And any comment on this exceedingly high malnutrition rates in light of the overall?
Well, I mean, it's yet another sign of the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. I mean, we're in the midst of a particular harsh winter conditions. Our humanitarian operations are what they are. I think I don't need to add to what Martin and the DSG have already been saying, but it's yet another horrific manifestation of the humanitarian situation.
And a third follow-up on UNOPS. Are we going to get any indication of what the findings were that led to his separation?
Mr. Van Schalborn still has the ability to appeal through the UN accountability process. So at this point, I don't want to go any further than what I've said. Ms. Salome.
Sorry. I just wondered, since there's this event happening today with the Israeli ambassador, if the Secretary General would bring it up with his concerns.
The event this afternoon is focused on Holocaust remembrance. If something comes up, I will let you know. Ibtisam and then Margaret Bashir.
So a follow-up on that. So the statement you read by Mr. Winsland and also what you said as an answer to Edith about the Secretary General expressed on, I mean, you talked about expressing alarm and sadness, but if we look at what's happening, but it doesn't rise to the seriousness and devastating of the situation. You didn't even condemn. If you look at the events that happened only today, 10 are killed, the number of killed rised from 9 to 10, 16 injured, among them children and civilians and old women. Ambulances and crews were attacked. Also, the Israelis, according to media, local media reports, Israeli forces stormed Jenin hospital, intentionally fired gas at a pediatric department in the hospital and causing breathing problems for children, among children. From the beginning of this year, 29 Palestinians were killed. That's more than one Palestinian every day. And then all you have to say, we are sad, and you're not even condemning
Listen,
that. And why is that?
I didn't just say we're sad. I said the Secretary General was deeply alarmed by what we have seen. We have seen this cycle of violence continue and continue. And I think Mr. Vennesland and others have been extremely vocal about giving a very vivid description of what was going on. You've raised other particular issues regarding hospitals and other. We will look into that. I don't want to comment on them without having more information. But I can tell you also on the UN end, on the UNRWA Health Center in Jenin camp is operational and providing primary care service to those who need it. The schools are currently closed, and the WHO is also on the ground supporting the Palestinian health authorities, including in the hospital. And we will check with them about the reports, troubling reports you mentioned from the hospital.
A follow-up, I'm not sure if you answered actually that part about the spokesperson of the Palestinian president announcing that the security coordination between the PA
I mean,
and the Israelis.
if this is in fact the case, it's another example of the real risk and action of further bringing making the situation even more challenging and more complicated, both on the political end, but especially for the people who live there.
And just a quick follow-up. As you know, Secretary Blinken is visiting the area. Is Mr. Winsland going to meet him?
I will check. Ms. Bashir.
Steph, is Mr. Van Schilborn's dismissal related to the money that was lost in those investments last year and that sustainable impact
Yeah, I mean,
fund?
it's
Is that
it's
all
part of
related
the-
to that investigation?
It's part of the what we did looking into the conduct at UNOPS and the S3I. Deji. And then.
I'll put two questions into one. Yeah, I'll try my best. So, for the past 2 days, there's developments in African countries. For Burkina Faso, French Foreign Ministry recalled its ambassador because the Burkina Faso government decided to end the agreement, and the France will withdraw its troops within a month. And second, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda, obviously they had some issues these days because they accusing each other of aggression. How do these two situation developments affect the local operation of the UN agencies there, and how much does the UN worried about the situation?
It's not so much where those two particular events impact us. What's impacting our ability to operate in Burkina and the Sahel as a whole is the deteriorating security situation, and I think we've been very clear. Not for us to comment on the state of bilateral relations between Burkina and France. But we have, I mean, I think the Secretary General, I think in his press conference here, talked about the very, very challenging situation in the Sahel, which is challenging first and foremost for the people who live in the region, but it makes it that much more difficult for us to operate on a humanitarian level when there is insecurity. We're very much concerned about the incident between the the DR Congo and Rwanda on the plane that you mentioned. I think this underscores the urgency of advancing the implementation of the commitments that both Kigali and Kinshasa made under various processes that we've seen recently, whether those were discussions in Rwanda, discussions in Nairobi. Our special envoy for the Great Lakes, I think, recently issued a statement on that. But again, it is, when there is the kind of incident that we see with the plane, things can, it increases the risk of further deterioration, and it's very important that both countries exercise maximum restraint. Our operations are continuing. I mean, I just laid out what our peacekeeping mission is able to do, but obviously this is not a positive step in terms of insecurity that we see in the region, notably in the Congo, for civilians that continue to pay the price. Mario.
Just to follow up on Peru, one of the main demands right now in the protests is to have the elections earlier than scheduled. It's April next year, I believe. Does the UN consider that moving the elections could be a way to stabilize the country, or to...
Look, I think a way to stabilize the country would be for the security forces to ensure that people have a right to demonstrate peacefully, that there be accountability for the killings that we've seen. In terms of the political process as a whole, that will be something that the Peruvian people and Peruvian institutions will have to move on in a way that brings the country together. Habibi.
Merci, Steph. Abdullah Messi from Al Arabi TV. Just a follow-up on Ibtisam's question. According to some Israeli media, the UN envoy spoke to Palestinian officials who threatened to suspend security coordination with Israel. Can you confirm this talk? If yes, can we have more details?
No, I mean, I can only confirm that Mr. Venesland and his colleagues have been on the phone with Israelis and with Palestinians, as they often have to do in these situations.
Thank you, Toshi from Kyoto News. On the situation in Ukraine, with more tanks on the way to Ukraine, it seems almost certain that fighting will be intensified in the coming month. Is there something that you would like to appeal to all the parties of the conflict to maybe in order to avoid the worst scenario you can think of?
Well, the worst scenario that we can think of, it's already a pretty bad scenario for the people of Ukraine. We're not going to comment every time there's new weapons coming in, and what we want to see is a peace, a just peace, in line with the UN Charter, in line with international law. But what we're seeing now is not moving us in that direction, which is not stopping us from doing what we can to support the humanitarian activities, as I've just mentioned. I'm going to go to the screen, and then I'll come back to the waiting hands in the room. Abdelhamid, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Stéphane. I want to follow up with the about the statement about the language. You know, Stéphane, that the choice of words is not just fully. And I want to ask first, what does he mean by military?
Abdelhamid, Abdelhamid, we're all having trouble hearing you. It's not just me, so don't think I'm evading the question. But from the words I can pick up, I think it goes to the heart of the continuing disagreement that you and I have on language that is used. I'm using the language that I'm using. Feel free to comment and analyze it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep using the language that I'm using. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. Today, the UN mission in Mali said a Mali court had sentenced a man to death for the killings of 3 UN peacekeepers almost 4 years ago. Sorry. What is your comment on that, especially on the death penalty aspect?
Well, you know, as you know, this is the second time that attacks against UN peacekeepers have been the focus of judicial prosecution, resulting in trials and convictions in Mali. I think this week's trial, from where we stand, was a part of the efforts of Mali to improve the judicial response to attack against peacekeepers. We welcome the accountability because we've always talked about the need for accountability for the killing of peacekeepers. However, it remains our position on the death penalty, and the opposition to the death penalty remains unchanged. We do note, from what I understand, that there's been a moratorium on the death penalty in Mali for now quite some time. But we both welcome the accountability, but our position against the death penalty remains. You know, it bears noting that 32 peacekeepers have lost their lives due to malicious acts just this year. That's twice as many as in 2020. And Mali remains the mission with the largest number of casualties that we have across the system, 15 just last year.
When you say this year?
Sorry?
Last year.
Last year, yeah, last year. Yeah, sorry.
We're only in
Yes, sorry.
January.
Yes, thank you.
And
Yes, last
sort
year.
of a housekeeping question.
Oh, I love housekeeping.
Some of us
I'm very bad at it.
Some of us found out today that the ICC prosecutor and Amal Clooney came to the stakeout after the Security Council meeting yesterday, and none of us knew about it. At least I don't think any of us knew about it.
I mean, to use a mixed metaphor, the horses clearly went to the water, but if they don't warn us they're going to go to the water, we can't announce it. So I apologize. If we had known, we would have announced it, but for whatever reason, we did not know. Okay. I will leave you in the hands of Ms. Kubiak.